Joining us once again, Mr. Jay Dardenne, the State Commissioner of Administration. Mr. Jay, welcome back to KEEL. Thanks for taking time for us again.
Good morning. Thank you.
So, there's a budget on the governor's desk, and problem solved.
Doesn't have his autograph on it yet.
Right? What's the plan?
Well, it doesn't have his autograph on it yet. I think it's unlikely this will become the budget bill that governs our expenses for the next fiscal year. And the special session will begin next Tuesday, during which we hopefully will consider the revenue options that have been talked about many times before to try and get enough revenue to be able to do the things that I think the people of this state expect state government to do, and that is fund TOPS, fund higher education at the same level it's been funded, and certainly take care of our health care needs and our Medicaid population. And to do that, obviously based upon the two budgets that passed the two chambers, this legislature has been unable to realize cuts that avoid devastating things in Louisiana. And this is consistent with what we've been saying. Those who say let's cut our way out of this problem have not been able to come up with cuts that are legitimate, or cuts that don't adversely affect major programs that people expect government to perform.
Mr. Jay, as I had stated earlier this morning, let's go through a little civics class here. So the governor has a budget on his desk, and he's got, I think, 20 days to sign, to veto, to line item. Meanwhile, there's a special session getting ready to start, and there's 14 days but 10 working days. Meanwhile, you might need a whole new budget. That's a lot of balls for a lot of people to keep up in the air, right?
Well, there are a lot of balls in the air, and these balls have been in the air for quite some time now. And during previous legislative sessions, regular session, now two regular sessions, and special session, the legislature's been unable to come up with any solutions that are workable. So in this very concentrated period that will begin Tuesday, the legislature will have the opportunity to raise revenue at the same time that they enact a responsible budget. And certainly the budget that's been sent to the governor is anything but responsible.
How will it be necessary to start the budget process from scratch? How could that happen?
Well, the budget process will begin anew. A new bill will have to be introduced in the House of Representatives and be heard by the Appropriations Committee, passed by the House, sent to the Senate, heard by the Finance Committee, passed by the Senate, and then back to the House to either concur or disagree with any change that the Senate might make. So this whole process regarding the budget will be repeated again during the special session.
But do we have time for all that, I guess, was my question.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely we have time. We have about 14 days. We have from the 22nd to June the 4th, whatever that time frame is, and that is plenty enough time for a very limited purpose, and that is considering revenue and enacting a budget. Now, that is easier than it sounds because that's been difficult to do, obviously, during the entire course of this regular session. But with staring the end of the fiscal year in the face and recognizing the inability of the legislature to come up with a responsible budget, I think and I hope that legislators will be much more focused and much more determined to do what needs to be done to provide the people of this state with a responsible working budget.
Commissioner of Administration Jay Dardenne, why not a novel idea? Why not the governor sign this budget, send it back to him, and go, okay, y'all don't fix this problem during the special session. Here's your budget, July 1.
It's not a budget that the governor can support, and he said that from the get-go. It's an irresponsible budget. It was a budget that was called a pretend budget by the chairman of the Finance Committee, and many senators, including a number of Republican senators, talked about how this is not the budget we really want, but this is the response to what the House did, which was to devastate health care. And the Senate said, well, we're going to repair the damage to health care, but in order to do that, we've got to devastate everything else, including higher education and further reductions in TOPS and basically ceasing the operation of government as we know it. Some people would say that's a good idea, but it's not a responsible idea.
So we're gonna have to raise taxes in the special session. We're gonna have to address the revenue issues, correct?
We're going to have to replace taxes that are expiring, and that's a big difference. I mean, the legislature enacted temporary taxes 20-some-odd months ago.
Temporary, so they're supposed to go off the books, right? I was promised they were temporary.
They do go. That's right. They do go off the books. They were temporary, but in so doing, the legislature recognized that there was a need for that temporary revenue in order to keep government operating in a responsible manner. And it's unreasonable to think that that $1.4 billion that disappears can simply permanently disappear from our tax base and expect government to continue doing the same things it's been doing. Common sense tells you that just doesn't work.
Then why was I told 2 years ago it was going to be temporary, that it could be temporary? Why wasn't I told 2 years ago we're going to need to keep some of this on the books?
Well, you certainly were by people who recognize this is going to go away. It was said to be temporary, but that doesn't mean that when it goes away, it doesn't have to be replaced. Remember, the idea was to enact those temporary taxes pending a report from the task force that the legislature created to recommend changes in the structure of our tax system. And that task force made its recommendations that have been totally ignored by the House, which has not sent a single measure to the Senate to consider by way of raising revenue and fixing this problem. That's what's now going to have to happen during this special session.
Jay, during the
the governor's talked about replacing a portion of what's rolling off. We've got $1.4 billion disappearing, and the governor said originally we need the 900 and some odd million, less the amount that comes to the state from changes in the federal government tax policy. And that is what got us to the $648 million that we now need.
Please help explain something to me, and because sometimes I'm not the brightest. You at the town hall meeting here at LSU Health the other day used the figure, our general fund budget is $9.6 billion. That came out of your mouth. And I'm familiar with the general fund budgets over the years. This is now our biggest ever. This surpasses, I believe, 2008 when we had all the Katrina money. Why is our general fund budget growing so much? Can you help explain that?
Well, it's not grown that much. If you look at it, Erin, over the past 10 years, it has stayed relatively constant. It has been hovering in that general area. It's not like it's gone up dramatically. And the temporary taxes that were imposed to make up for the use of one-time money during the previous administration, where budgets were balanced on the back of one-time money that disappeared year after year after year. And we said we're going to stop that. We're not going to fund recurring expenses with one-time revenue. And so that state general fund amount is what the legislature really has the ability to expend. But if you remember, I also noted that about 85% of that $9.6 billion is dedicated, and it funds K-12 education, and it funds supplemental pay for police officers, and it pays for debt service. And so there's not a lot of flexibility for the legislature to decide how to spend that money. But if you take $1.4 billion away from that 9.6, you see pretty quickly that drops the pot dramatically, and you simply can't do everything we're now doing if you don't have some of that money replaced. And that's what the governor's saying. Let's replace some of what is expiring so that we can do the things that the people of the state expect us to do. And if we don't raise that revenue, the legislature has the responsibility to say, what is it we don't want to fund? What are we not going to do? And given the chance to do that in the regular session, the House said, let's just eviscerate Medicaid. The Senate said, let's just eviscerate everything else, because the answer is you're going to eviscerate some things if you don't have that much money. You're going to make them go away.
A lot of pundits, a lot of analysts over the last week or 10 days have said that the governor, that the Senate budget that they voted on, that there is now a rift between Governor Edwards and his backers on the Senate side. Is there a rift? Is there a problem? Can he still count on them?
Sure. I don't think there's a rift. I mean, obviously, everybody understands this process, and everybody understands what goes on, and we objected to the Senate's response to an irresponsible budget by we suggested just ignore it. It's not going to work, and you know it's not going to work, so let's not continue this pretend process, as the chairman said. But the Senate wanted to show that it could enact a budget as well, and point out how ridiculous it was to think that we could continue to fund things without the money. And so that's why the Senate did what they did. There is no rift between the governor and the Senate. The process is the process, and that's what happened.
But you, just to wrap up, you guys are confident that the governor is confident that whatever revenue shortfalls there are can be made up in this 14-day special session.
Yeah, there's no question they can be. The legislators just have to decide how much money they're willing to raise and to match expenditures with revenue. And if they don't raise enough revenue to fund the things that need to be funded, they need to say in the budget what it is they're willing to cut.
Anybody reaching out from the Republican side on the House side, say theoretically?
Oh, yeah, I think there are discussions underway, and I think a lot of the Republicans recognize they've got to vote for some revenue, and I think the question is going to be how much. That's what the debate is going to be about, and we believe we need the $648 million to do what has to be done to fund the things that both chambers have said they want to see funded.